The sound of a Winchester rifle cracked through the evening air. Mason Coulter lay prone on the roof of his barn, the brass shell casing still hot as it rolled across the wooden shingles. 60 yards out, a man dropped with a howl, clutching his thigh. "You son of a bitch!" Ray Harlow shouted from behind an overturned wagon. "That's the second man you've shot. We've got you surrounded, Coulter." Mason's weathered face remained impassive as he ejected another shell and took aim. Blood seeped through his shirt where a bullet had grazed his left shoulder, but his hands were steady as iron. Inside the cabin, he knew Sarah was protecting little Emily with his spare Remington, the one he'd spent hours teaching her to shoot. "Mayor wants you dead or alive," Harlow called out. "But I'm thinking dead's gonna be easier." Mason spotted movement to his right, a gunman trying to flank the house. He swiveled, leading the target perfectly before squeezing the trigger. The Winchester bucked against his shoulder. Another man down. "Papa!" Emily's terrified voice rose from below. "They're trying to get in the back door." Mason's eyes narrowed. For the first time that night, something besides calm determination crossed his face. Raw fear for his family. "I've got it!" Sarah's voice rang out, followed immediately by the unmistakable boom of the Remington. "Stay back, Emily." As Mason slid down the roof to reposition, one thought burned in his mind. This wasn't supposed to happen. Not after everything they'd survived together. Not after finding each other. His mind flashed back to that fateful day, 3 months earlier, when Sarah Miller had first appeared at his door, the day that changed everything. 3 months earlier, Mason Coulter drove the post-hole digger deep into the Arizona soil with a single powerful thrust. At 40, his body was a map of hard living. Shoulders broad from breaking horses, hands calloused from working cattle, face weathered by sun and wind. A jagged scar ran from his right temple to jaw, disappearing into a dark beard flecked with early gray. He paused to wipe sweat from his brow, scanning the horizon of his ranch. From this rise, he could see his entire spread. A modest 2-bedroom cabin with a stone chimney, sending wisps of smoke into the autumn air, a sturdy barn with fresh-hewn timber reinforcing the north wall, a corral holding 3 horses, and about 50 head of cattle grazing in the valley below. 15 miles from Silver Creek meant peace and quiet, the way he preferred it since returning from scouting for the Army. Mason's right hand unconsciously checked the Colt single-action Army revolver on his hip, an original 1873 model with custom grips of polished mesquite wood. His Winchester 76 leaned against a nearby fence post, always within reach. Some habits die hard, especially for a man who'd survived the Apache Wars. The distant sound of wheels and hoofbeats made him turn, eyes narrowing. A stagecoach approached, unusual since the main route ran nowhere near his property. Mason took up his Winchester, chambering a round with a practiced motion before resting the rifle in the crook of his arm. Not threatening, but ready. The coach pulled up at his gate, dust swirling around the wheels. The driver, a man Mason recognized from town but had never spoken to, called out with a smirk, "Special delivery for the Coulter Ranch." Mason approached with the measured stride of a man who never rushed, but always arrived exactly when needed. His eyes, pale blue under the shadow of his hat brim, revealed nothing. The coach door swung open, and a young woman stepped out, clutching a small canvas bag and a folded letter. She was perhaps 25, with chestnut hair pulled back in a simple style, revealing a face with high cheekbones and determined green eyes. Her dress was worn but clean, her posture straight despite the obvious fatigue of travel. "Mr. Coulter," she asked, her voice steady, "I'm Sarah Miller. I've come about your letter." Mason's brow furrowed slightly. He had sent no letter. "The one asking for someone to care for your daughter," she continued, extending the paper toward him. "You wrote that you needed someone after your wife passed." Mason took the letter, his expression darkening as he read words he'd never written. This was someone's idea of a cruel joke, likely that pompous ass Mayor Hollister and his cronies, who'd been trying to drive him off his land for months. The stagecoach driver and his companions snickered from their perch. "Thought the silent man might want some company," the driver called out. "Paid her fare all the way from Tucson, too. Word is she was desperate to leave." Mason's jaw tightened, a muscle working in his cheek. He moved his hand to the notebook in his shirt pocket, the one he used for the rare occasions when gestures weren't enough, when the cabin door opened with a creak. 3-year-old Emily stood there, blonde hair catching the late afternoon sun, clutching the hand-carved wooden horse Mason had made for her birthday. Her eyes, so like her mother's, widened at the sight of Sarah. Then Emily did something that froze Mason in place. She spoke, not to him, but to this stranger. "Mama," she asked, her voice small but clear, "did you come back?" The stagecoach men roared with laughter. "Would you listen to that? The little half-breed thinks you're her dead mama." Mason's reaction was instant and terrifying. In one fluid motion that belied his size, the Winchester came up, the barrel steady as death itself. He didn't aim it directly at the men, but the message in his eyes was clear. One more word, and they'd be feeding the vultures by nightfall. The driver's laughter died in his throat. "Now hold on, Coulter. It was just a bit of fun." Mayor Hollister thought. Mason worked the lever on the Winchester, the sound of a round being chambered cutting through the suddenly silent air. All right. The driver flicked the reins. "Have fun with your mail order, bride." The stagecoach pulled away, leaving Sarah standing awkwardly in the yard with her bag. She looked from the retreating coach to Mason, mortification coloring her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said. "I didn't realize. I'll go back to town." Mason hesitated, looking from Sarah to Emily, who still stood in the doorway. His daughter hadn't spoken a single word to anyone but him since witnessing her mother's death 2 years ago. Yet she had called this stranger Mama. Mason reached for the small notebook and pencil he kept in his shirt pocket. He wrote quickly, then handed the paper to Sarah. "Not my letter, but if you need work, can stay. Cook, help with Emily, separate room, safe here." Sarah read the note, then looked up at Mason, studying him. Whatever she saw in his face must have reassured her, because she nodded slowly. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. "I was accused of stealing from my employer in Tucson. I didn't do it, but no one would believe me. I lost everything." Mason nodded once, then wrote another note. "Mayor's men playing cruel joke. But Emily spoke to you. First time speaking to anyone but me in 2 years. That means something." Sarah's eyes widened, then softened as she looked at the little girl, who was now hiding partially behind the doorframe, still watching them. "I understand," she said quietly. "I'll stay, Mr. Coulter. I'll earn my keep." Mason nodded again, then gestured toward the house. As they walked to the cabin, Mason remained a step behind Sarah. Without a word, he removed his coat and placed it gently around her shoulders against the chill wind. The simple gesture seemed to surprise her, but she pulled it closer with a grateful smile. Inside, the cabin was modest but meticulously maintained. A main room with a stone fireplace and kitchen area, rifles mounted carefully on the wall, and 2 small bedrooms. Everything was arranged with military precision, tools hung in perfect alignment, supplies organized by frequency of use, floors swept clean. Mason showed Sarah to the smaller bedroom, which had a narrow but comfortable-looking bed, a chest for clothes, and a small window facing east. A vase of desert wildflowers sat on the simple dresser, the only decoration in the Spartan room. "It's perfect," Sarah said. "Thank you." Mason wrote one more note before leaving her to settle in. "Supper at sundown. Rest now. Lock your door at night. Not because of me, habit of safety out here. As he closed her door, Mason leaned against the wall of the main room, his mind racing. For 2 years, it had been just him and Emily, living in near complete silence. Now this woman was here, talking and bringing change. He wasn't sure if it was for the better, but Emily had spoken, and that alone made him willing to take the risk. From her doorway, Emily watched her father with solemn eyes, then whispered so quietly he almost missed it. "She has Mama's smile." Mason knelt to his daughter's level, his rough hand gentle as he brushed her hair back. His eyes asked a silent question. "Can she stay?" Emily asked. Mason nodded, and for the first time in months, his daughter smiled. The next morning, Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and bacon. She found Mason already dressed and cooking at the cast-iron stove, Emily setting the table with small tin plates. The little girl had gone silent again, but her eyes followed Sarah with open curiosity. "Good morning," Sarah said. "Please, let me help." Mason gestured to the coffee pot with a nod. Sarah poured 3 cups, adding a splash of milk to Emily's. Breakfast passed in comfortable silence, broken only by the clink of utensils and the occasional comment from Sarah, who seemed to understand that in this household, silence wasn't something to be filled, but respected. After breakfast, Mason wrote a note explaining he needed to check the north pasture fence line and would be gone most of the day. He handed Sarah a key to the storeroom and another note with instructions about meals and Emily's routine. As Mason saddled his gelding, a powerful blood bay named Rusty, Sarah approached the corral fence. "I noticed your Winchester 76, she said. "My father had one. He was a lawman in Kansas before we moved to Arizona territory." Mason looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face at her knowledge of firearms. "He taught me to shoot," she added. "Said a woman alone needs to defend herself." Mason nodded in agreement, then mounted with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. He tipped his hat once to her and Emily before riding out, the morning sun at his back. Sarah spent the morning exploring the cabin and storeroom, taking inventory of supplies and making mental notes of what needed attention. Emily shadowed her silently, occasionally touching Sarah's skirt as if to make sure she was real. In the afternoon, Sarah discovered Mason's vegetable garden behind the house, slightly overgrown but still producing. As she harvested tomatoes and green beans, she began telling Emily about her own childhood, how her mother had taught her to can vegetables and make preserves. "Would you like to help me make some tomato sauce?" Sarah asked. Emily didn't speak but nodded eagerly. Together they worked in the kitchen, Sarah guiding the little girl's hands as they crushed tomatoes and added herbs from the small collection in Mason's pantry. When Mason returned at dusk, his eyebrows rose at the sight of freshly canned jars cooling on the table and the rich smell of stew simmering on the stove. "We made sauce," Emily said quietly, looking up at her father. "And biscuits." Mason's expression softened as he looked from his daughter to Sarah, a question in his eyes. "She's a wonderful helper," Sarah said. "Smart, too. She knew exactly which herbs to add." That night, after Emily was asleep, Mason sat at the kitchen table cleaning his firearms, a ritual Sarah's father had performed every evening as well. Sarah sat across from him, mending a tear in one of Emily's dresses. "May I ask you something, Mr. Coulter?" she said. Mason looked up and nodded once. "Why don't you speak? Your notes are so well written." Mason set down the cloth he was using on his Colt. He considered for a moment, then wrote in his notepad. "Some things break a man's voice. War, then Lily's murder." "Emily mentioned her mother had died," Sarah said softly. "I'm sorry." Mason wrote again, his pencil moving more slowly this time. "Lily was Comanche. Town didn't approve. Hollister led the men who killed her. I couldn't stop them. I tried." He touched the scar on his face unconsciously. "And no one was punished?" Sarah asked, anger edging her voice. Mason's expression turned grim as he wrote, Judge is Hollister's cousin, sheriff his drinking buddy, no justice in Silver Creek. So that's why you live so far from town, Sarah realized, and why the mayor wants your land. Mason nodded, adding, water rights, silver and hills beyond creek. He'll never get it. And Emily, Sarah asked gently, she stopped speaking too. Saw everything, hiding in cupboard, spoke only to me after, until you came. Sarah felt tears well in her eyes. I'm so sorry, Mason, for both of you. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He noticed, his eyes meeting hers briefly before he returned to his gun cleaning. But something had shifted between them. A bridge crossed, a trust beginning to form. A week passed, then two. Sarah fell into the rhythm of ranch life, learning Mason's routines and adapting her own skills to complement his. She noticed how he meticulously maintained everything on the property. Fences checked weekly, tools cleaned after every use, horses groomed daily. It wasn't just practicality, it was control in a world where too much had been taken from him. One morning, Sarah was hanging laundry when she heard a rattlesnake's warning. Emily had wandered near the woodpile where the snake had coiled, ready to strike. Sarah grabbed Mason's spare revolver from the porch hook and fired in one smooth motion. The shot took the snake's head clean off. Mason came running from the barn, Winchester in hand. When he saw the dead snake and Emily safely behind Sarah, he lowered the rifle, his eyes filled with questions. My father insisted I learn, Sarah explained, her hands still trembling slightly from the adrenaline. Said rattlers don't care if you're a lady. That afternoon, Mason took Sarah to a clearing behind the barn where he had set up targets on fence posts. Without being asked, he showed her how to clean and load both the Remington revolver and his Winchester rifle. His hands were sure as he demonstrated proper stance and sighting, occasionally repositioning her elbow or shoulder with a gentle touch. By sundown, Sarah had hit more targets than she missed, and Mason's approval was evident in the slight nod he gave as they walked back to the cabin. Emily, who had watched the entire lesson from a safe distance, ran ahead of them, picking up a stick and pretending it was a rifle. I shoot too, she announced, like Sarah. Mason and Sarah exchanged a glance. Something was healing in this child, day by day. Their peace was shattered 3 days later when 3 riders appeared on the ridge overlooking the ranch. Mason spotted them first, immediately sending Emily inside with Sarah while he took his Winchester and moved to the porch, seemingly relaxed but alert as a mountain lion. The lead rider was Ray Harlow, a lean man with a thin mustache and cold eyes. He worked as security for Mayor Hollister, which everyone knew meant he handled problems that required violence or intimidation. The 2 men flanking him were clearly hired guns, their eyes scanning the property with professional detachment. Afternoon, Coulter, Harlow called out as they approached. Mayor sent me to check if your house guest is settling in all right. Mason said nothing, his rifle resting casually across his lap. I see you're still not much for conversation, Harlow continued with a smirk. Maybe the lady would like to chat. The cabin door opened and Sarah stepped out, the Remington held discreetly behind her skirts. I'm settling in just fine, Mr. Harlow. Please tell the mayor his concern isn't necessary. Harlow's eyes narrowed at her tone. Well now, Miss Miller, you might want to be more neighborly. Silver Creek's a small community. Word travels fast, like that business in Tucson with Mrs. Hargrove's missing jewelry. Sarah stiffened but held her ground. That was a false accusation, as you well know. Maybe not, Harlow shrugged. But a woman with a tarnished reputation living alone with a man. Folks might talk. Mason stood slowly, his Winchester now held at his side, his eyes fixed on Harlow with deadly focus. Oh, and Coulter, Harlow added. Mayor wanted me to remind you that property taxes are due next month. He's purchased your banknote from Tucson First National. Says if you can't pay in full, he might be willing to accept your water rights as settlement. Mason's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed his knuckles whitening on the rifle. "We don't respond well to threats, Mr. Harlow," she said coldly. "Now, unless you have actual business here, this is private property." Harlow tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Just delivering a message, ma'am. But a word of advice. You might want to ask your silent friend about what happened in Dodge City 6 years ago. 5 men went into that saloon. Only Coulter walked out." As the riders turned to leave, one of the hired guns spat on the ground and muttered, "Half-breed lover." In a blur of motion too fast to follow, Mason raised his Winchester and fired. The bullet kicked up dirt inches from the man's horse, causing it to rear in panic. "Jesus Christ, Coulter!" the man shouted, struggling to control his mount. Mason worked the lever, chambering another round, his meaning clear. The next shot wouldn't miss. The 3 riders galloped away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Sarah watched them go, her heart pounding. When she turned to Mason, his face was a stone mask, but his eyes burned with a cold fury that made her shiver. "Is it true," she asked, "about the debt? About Dodge City?" Mason holstered his rifle and took out his notepad. "Debt is real. $800 due in 30 days. As for Dodge, they were rustlers attacking a family. I did what was necessary." Sarah nodded slowly. "And the water rights? Is that why the mayor wants your land?" Mason's expression darkened as he wrote, "There's silver in the hills beyond the creek. He wants it all." That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Through her window, she saw Mason sitting on the porch, rifle across his knees, watching the darkness. She realized then that this man, who communicated more with silence than most did with words, had been fighting this battle alone for too long. She slipped from her bed and joined him on the porch, bringing a blanket to wrap around both their shoulders against the desert night's chill. Mason looked at her with surprise but shifted to make room on the bench. "We'll figure something out," she said simply, "together." Mason studied her face in the moonlight, then nodded once, a solemn pact between 2 people who'd found unexpected allies in a hostile world. The next morning, Sarah was searching the storage shed for more flour when she discovered a small trunk pushed against the back wall. It was unlocked, and curiosity got the better of her. Inside were a woman's belongings, a beaded necklace, a hairbrush with intricate carvings, a faded dress with Comanche designs, and beneath them all, a charcoal drawing. The image showed Mason, looking younger and less weathered, standing beside a beautiful Comanche woman who held an infant Emily. They were smiling. Mason was smiling with unmistakable happiness. Sarah stared at the drawing, a lump forming in her throat. This was his family, his real family. She was just a stranger who had arrived under false pretenses, an accidental addition to their broken home. "Found something interesting?" Sarah jumped at the voice. Joseph Blackfeather, Mason's elderly half-Apache neighbor from the adjacent property, stood in the doorway of the shed. He visited occasionally, one of the few people Mason seemed comfortable around. "I'm sorry," Sarah said, hastily returning the drawing to the trunk. "I shouldn't have pried." Joseph shrugged, his leathery face creasing with a smile. "That was Lily, beautiful woman. Strong, too. Could outride most men and shoot the eye out of a hawk at 50 paces. "What happened to her?" Sarah asked, unable to help herself. "Mason told me she was killed, but not the details." Joseph's weathered face grew somber. Silver Creek wasn't always the growing town it is now. When Mason married Lily, folks didn't take kindly to a white man with a Comanche wife. Mayor back then, Hollister's predecessor, stirred up trouble, claimed she was a spy for renegade bands. Joseph paused, his eyes distant with memory. One night, a group of men came while Mason was in town buying supplies. They dragged Lily out. Emily saw it all from where Lily had hidden her. When Mason returned, Joseph shook his head. They'd hanged her from the old cottonwood by the creek. Mason cut her down, but it was too late. He went after the men responsible, nearly got himself killed, took 6 bullets, and they beat him until they thought he was dead. But he survived, Sarah whispered. Body did, Joseph said. Something else died that night. When he finally healed enough to speak, he just didn't. Not more than a word or two when absolutely necessary. Been that way 2 years now. Sarah felt tears welling in her eyes. And the men who did it? Never brought to justice. Some left town. Some still live there. Respectable citizens now. Joseph's tone turned bitter. And now Hollister wants this land. He was one of them that night, though no one can prove it. That evening, Sarah packed her few belongings into her bag. She couldn't stay, not as a painful reminder of what Mason had lost. She left a note on the kitchen table and slipped out while Mason was checking the herd in the south pasture. She made it halfway down the road before hearing hoofbeats behind her. Mason pulled up alongside, his expression questioning. He handed her a note. Why? I saw the drawing, Sarah admitted. I know about Lily. I can't replace her, Mason. I shouldn't be here. Mason shook his head and wrote again, more urgently. I did not choose you in a letter, but I have chosen you every day since you arrived. Sarah read the words twice, tears blurring her vision. I don't know if that's enough, she whispered. Mason dismounted and stood before her. To Sarah's shock, he spoke, his voice rough and rusty from disuse but clear enough. It has to be, he said. Emily needs you. He struggled as if the words physically pained him. I need you to stay. Sarah stared at him, stunned. You can speak. Mason nodded, then reverted to writing. Only when words matter more than silence. He extended his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah took it and allowed him to help her mount behind him on the horse. They rode back to the ranch in silence, but something had shifted between them. A truth acknowledged, a connection deepened. When they reached the cabin, Emily was waiting on the porch, her small face tight with worry until she saw Sarah. The little girl ran to her, arms outstretched. You came back, Emily said, wrapping her arms around Sarah's legs. Looking over Emily's head at Mason, Sarah nodded. I came back. That night, a storm rolled in, bringing howling winds and lashing rain. The three of them sat by the fire, Sarah reading aloud from one of the few books in the house, a collection of Western tales, while Emily leaned against her side and Mason cleaned his colt, the familiar ritual soothing in its precision. The peace was shattered by the crash of breaking glass. Mason was on his feet instantly, the revolver in his hand. Through the window came the flicker of flames. The barn was on fire. Emily, stay inside, Sarah commanded, grabbing the Remington from its hook. Together they rushed into the storm. The barn blazed despite the rain, and shadows moved around the corral. Men, at least 4 of them, faces covered with bandanas. One fired a shot that splintered wood by Mason's head. Mason signaled for Sarah to take cover behind the water trough while he moved toward the woodpile. With practiced precision, he fired 2 shots, dropping one attacker with a wound to the leg. Sarah, remembering her lessons, waited until a second man moved into view, then fired, causing him to dive for cover. I thought you said she was just a school teacher, one of the men shouted. Shut up and kill them both, came the reply, a voice Sarah recognized as Ray Harlow's. Mason made a dash for the barn, intent on saving the horses. Sarah provided covering fire, her heart pounding as she watched him disappear into the smoke. Moments later, he emerged, leading 2 panicked horses. The third had already escaped and was running in the paddock. One of the attackers tried to circle behind Sarah. She pivoted and fired, hitting him in the arm. The wounded man cried out and fell. Jesus, she shot me, he yelled. Mason dropped to one knee and took careful aim, hitting another man in the shoulder. Coulter, you bastard, he shouted. Hollister's gonna burn you out one way or another. The remaining assailants retreated, dragging their wounded. Mason secured the horses, then worked with Sarah to battle the barn fire. By dawn, they had saved half the structure, though much of the hay and feed was lost. The injured attacker Sarah had shot was tied to a chair in the cabin. Mason stood over him, his expression stone cold. The man, barely more than a boy, looked terrified. "Please don't kill me," he begged. "Harlow paid us $50 to scare you off. Said nobody would care if a half-breed lover got run out." Mason's hand twitched toward his gun, but Sarah placed her hand on his arm. "He's not worth it," she said quietly. Mason nodded once, then spoke, his voice stronger than before. "Tell Harlow and Hollister, next time, I won't aim for the leg." The sound of his voice shocked the young man as much as the threat. Mason untied him, bandaged his wound, and set him on a horse with instructions to ride to town, a message delivered in blood and fear. As they watched him go, Mason turned to Sarah, his face revealing a rare vulnerability. "You saved my life," he said, each word measured and deliberate, "and fought like a mountain lion." Sarah realized her hands were still shaking from the adrenaline. "I was terrified." Mason shook his head. "Courage isn't absence of fear. It's action despite it." He reached out and touched her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle. "Like you." Inside, they found Emily hiding in the stone fireplace, trembling but safe. Sarah coaxed her out while Mason checked the cabin for any damage. When Emily was finally asleep again, Sarah joined Mason on the porch, where he sat keeping watch. "They'll come back, won't they?" she asked. Mason nodded grimly. "With more men, but so will we." He pointed to the ridge where Joseph Blackfeather's cabin stood. Lanterns burned there. The old Apache had seen the fire and would come at first light. "Then we'll be ready," Sarah said with newfound determination. "This is our home. I won't let them take it." Mason looked at her with surprise at the word "our." After a moment, he reached out and took her hand in his, rough, calloused fingers entwining with hers. No words, written or spoken, were necessary. The attack changed everything. Mason spent the next days reinforcing the cabin's defenses, boarding vulnerable windows, creating firing positions, stockpiling ammunition. Joseph Blackfeather came to help, bringing supplies and information from town. "Hollister's telling folks you fired on innocent travelers," the old man reported. "Sheriff's in his pocket, so don't expect justice from that quarter." Mason nodded, his voice still used sparingly. 30 days until banknote due." "He won't wait that long." "What about selling some cattle?" Sarah suggested. "Would that cover the debt?" Mason shook his head. "Not enough. Drought last year hit hard. Need at least $500 more." Sarah bit her lip and thought, "I could go to Tucson, try to clear my name. I had savings there." Mason's expression darkened immediately. "Too dangerous. Harlow has men everywhere." "What about Judge Patterson in Fort Bowie?" Joseph suggested. "He's not in Hollister's pocket. Known him 30 years. Honest man." "Too far," Mason replied. "Can't leave ranch undefended." The conversation was interrupted by Emily, who tugged at Sarah's skirt. "I know where money is," she said softly. The adults exchanged glances. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Sarah asked. "Mama showed me. Secret place. For bad times." Mason knelt to his daughter's level, his expression intent. "Where, Emily?" The little girl pointed to the stone hearth. "Under the big rock. Mama said tell no one until we need it most." Mason and Joseph moved the heavy stones of the fireplace, revealing a small cavity beneath. Inside was an oilskin packet. Mason opened it with trembling hands to find a leather pouch containing gold coins and a folded letter in a woman's handwriting. "My beloved Mason, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I've saved these 20 double eagles, $400 from the money my father left me. Use it to keep our Emily safe. Remember your promise that you would live, not just survive, even if I couldn't be with you." Find joy again, my love. Always yours. Lily. Mason sat heavily on the floor, the letter clutched in his hand, tears streaming unchecked down his face. Emily climbed into his lap, touching his wet cheek with confusion. Papa sad? She asked. No, little one, he managed to say, his voice breaking. Papa remembering. Mama was very smart, very brave. Sarah and Joseph stepped outside to give them privacy. On the porch, Joseph rolled a cigarette with practiced fingers. Never seen him cry before, the old man said quietly. Not even at her funeral. Sometimes healing hurts worst at first, Sarah replied, watching the sun rise over the eastern hills. Like setting a broken bone. Joseph studied her thoughtfully. You love him, don't you? Sarah's eyes widened at the directness of the question. I care for them both, very much. Humph, Joseph grunted, lighting his cigarette. Sounds like love to me. And from the way he looks at you when you're not watching, it's mutual. Before Sarah could respond, they heard hoofbeats approaching, at least 5 riders coming fast. Joseph tossed his cigarette and reached for his rifle. Company's coming, he said grimly, and not the welcome kind. The riders turned out to be Sheriff Doyle and 3 deputies, along with Ray Harlow. The sheriff, a portly man with a gray mustache and nervous eyes, dismounted awkwardly. Coulter, he called out, need to have a word with you about an incident in town. Mason appeared in the doorway, rifle held casually but ready. Sarah and Joseph flanked him, similarly armed. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. Got a young man, claims you shot him unprovoked when he was passing by your property. Says you've got a woman here against her will too. Sarah stepped forward, Remington visible in her apron pocket. That's a lie. Sheriff, those men attacked us, burned half our barn. They admitted Mayor Hollister sent them. Harlow laughed. Quite a story, ma'am. And you are? Sarah Miller. Harlow's smile turned predatory. Funny coincidence. There's a warrant from Tucson for a Sarah Miller. Theft of jewelry and cash from her employer. Quite a substantial amount. Mason tensed beside her. That's not true, Sarah insisted. I was accused falsely. Mrs. Hargrove's son took the items and blamed me when they were discovered missing. Well, that's for a judge to decide, Sheriff Doyle said, sounding almost apologetic. Miss Miller, I'm afraid you'll need to come with us. Mason stepped in front of Sarah, his rifle now aimed at the sheriff's chest. His meaning was clear. Don't make this worse, Coulter, Harlow warned. You're already facing charges for shooting Jenkins. Add resisting arrest, and you'll hang for sure. What happens to your daughter then? Joseph stepped forward. Sheriff, you know as well as I do that Hollister wants this land. These charges are fabricated. Stay out of this, Black Feather, one deputy warned. I'm not going anywhere, Sarah declared, her hand on Mason's arm. We've done nothing wrong. Sheriff Doyle sighed. Then I've got no choice. Mason Coulter, you're under arrest for assault and harboring a fugitive. Miss Miller, you're under arrest for outstanding warrants from Tucson territory. The deputies dismounted, hands on their weapons. Mason remained unmoved, rifle steady. Think about your daughter, Harlow said, his voice dripping with false concern. Do you want her to watch you die? Too? Something flashed in Mason's eyes, a pain so raw it made Sarah catch her breath. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. Mason, no, Sarah protested. Mason turned to her and spoke clearly. Trust me, stay alive. For Emily. The shock of hearing him speak momentarily stunned everyone. In that moment of confusion, Mason handed his rifle to Joseph, then stepped forward to be handcuffed. The deputies approached Sarah, who surrendered her revolver reluctantly. As they were being led to the horses, Emily ran from the house. No, she cried, don't take them. Harlow moved to block her path. Stay back, child. Mason surged against his restraints. a low growl emanating from his throat. The warning was clear even without words. "Let her say goodbye," Sheriff Doyle ordered, showing a hint of humanity. Emily ran to Sarah first, clinging to her skirts. "Don't go." Sarah knelt, fighting back tears. "Be brave, Emily. Stay with Mr. Blackfeather. We'll come back for you." Then Emily went to her father, who awkwardly knelt despite his bound hands. She threw her arms around his neck. "I love you, Papa," she whispered. Mason pressed his forehead to hers, then spoke softly. "Remember what I taught you. Watch. Listen. Stay strong." Joseph stepped forward. "I'll look after her, Mason, and I'll ride to Fort Bowie tonight. Judge Patterson needs to hear about this." As they rode away, Sarah caught a last glimpse of Emily standing in the yard, small and fragile beside Joseph's weathered form. She made a silent promise to return, whatever it took. The Silver Creek jail was little more than 2 cells in the back of the sheriff's office. Mason was placed in one, Sarah in the other. Through the bars, they could see each other but couldn't touch. "Why did you surrender?" Sarah asked when the deputies had left them alone. "2 against 5, Mason replied, his voice stronger with each use. "Bad odds with Emily there." "They'll never let us go," Sarah said. "Hollister wants your land too badly." Mason moved closer to the bars separating their cells. "Joseph's going to Fort Bowie. Patterson's a good man. And—" He glanced toward the sheriff's empty desk. "I've been in worse jails." Despite everything, Sarah smiled. "You're talking more." The corner of Mason's mouth twitched upward. "Seems I've got more to say now." That night, Sarah could barely sleep on the hard jail cot. Across the narrow corridor, Mason sat with his back against the wall, eyes open, watching. Occasionally their gazes would meet, and Sarah found strength in his steady presence, despite the iron bars between them. Morning brought Mayor Hollister, a corpulent man in an expensive suit, with small eyes and a politician's smile. He entered, flanked by Harlow and Sheriff Doyle. "Mr. Coulter," he began with false joviality, "this is an unfortunate situation. Violence, harboring criminals, not what we expect from Silver Creek citizens." Mason stared at him impassively. "However," Hollister continued, "I'm a reasonable man. I'm prepared to drop all charges against both of you under certain conditions." He unfolded a document and held it up. "This is a deed transfer for your ranch. Sign it and you and Miss Miller are free to go. I'll even throw in enough cash for stagecoach tickets to California. Fresh start and all that." "And if he refuses?" Sarah asked from her cell. Hollister's smile tightened. "Then you'll be sent to Tucson to face charges of theft, which I assure you will result in prison time. As for Mr. Coulter, assault on Jenkins combined with resisting arrest. Well, the territorial judge arrives next week. He's known for his strict sentencing." Mason stood and approached the bars. For a tense moment, he and Hollister stared at each other. "You were there," Mason said, his voice steady and clear. "The night Lily died." Hollister's face paled slightly, but he recovered quickly. "I don't know what you're talking about. Your wife's death was a tragedy, but—" "You held the rope," Mason continued, each word precise as a bullet. "I saw your face. So did my daughter." "These are desperate accusations from a desperate man," Hollister blustered. "Sheriff, I won't stand for this slander." "It's not slander if it's true," came a new voice. Judge Patterson stood in the doorway, a tall, stern-faced man in his 60s. Behind him was Joseph Blackfeather, and beside Joseph, to Sarah's surprise, stood Emily, along with a distinguished-looking man in a suit. "What's the meaning of this interruption?" Hollister demanded. "I received a most unusual midnight visit from Mr. Blackfeather and this young lady," Judge Patterson said, stepping into the office. "They had quite a story to tell. So much so that I felt compelled to ride through the night to hear the rest of it myself." The judge gestured to the man beside him. "This is Thomas Hargrove, Jr. from Tucson. He has a sworn affidavit confessing to the theft of his mother's jewelry, the same theft Miss Miller was accused of. Hargrove stepped forward, looking ashamed. I stole the items to pay gambling debts. When they were discovered missing, I blame Miss Miller. I've come to make it right. Sheriff Doyle looked increasingly uncomfortable. Harlow's hand drifted toward his gun. Furthermore, the judge continued, I've reviewed some very interesting telegrams about land purchases around Silver Creek. Seems several properties have changed hands under suspicious circumstances, all ending up owned by corporations tied to you, Mayor Hollister. This is outrageous, Hollister sputtered. You can't possibly believe. I believe we have enough to warrant a full investigation, Judge Patterson interrupted. Sheriff Doyle released these prisoners immediately. The sheriff hesitated, looking between the judge and the mayor. Now, Sheriff, Judge Patterson said firmly, unless you'd like to join the mayor as a subject of investigation. Doyle moved quickly to unlock the cells. As soon as the door opened, Emily rushed to her father. Mason knelt and embraced her, lifting her into his arms as he stood. Harlow, seeing which way the wind was blowing, attempted to back toward the door. Joseph Blackfeather blocked his path, the old Apache stance making it clear escape wasn't an option. Mayor Hollister, Judge Patterson said gravely, you are under arrest for conspiracy, fraud, and pending investigation into the murder of Lily Coulter 2 years ago. You can't do this, Hollister shouted. I built this town. These people are nothing. A half-breed lover and a thieving woman. Mason set Emily down and stepped toward Hollister. The mayor flinched, expecting violence. Instead, Mason spoke, his voice carrying the weight of 2 years of silence. My wife was Comanche royalty, he said clearly, worth 10 of you, and Sarah has more honor in her little finger than you've shown in your entire life. He turned away from Hollister, dismissing him completely, and extended his hand to Sarah. Let's go home. 2 weeks later, Mason stood on the porch of his ranch house, watching the sunset paint the Arizona sky in brilliant oranges and reds. The barn repairs were complete, thanks to help from neighboring ranchers who had finally learned the truth about Hollister's schemes. The former mayor now sat in the territorial prison awaiting trial for multiple charges, including murder. Ray Harlow had turned state's evidence in exchange for leniency, revealing the extent of Hollister's land-grabbing operations and his role in Lily's death years earlier. Sarah joined Mason on the porch, standing close beside him. Emily's finally asleep. She wanted me to tell you she finished her drawing. Mason smiled, a real smile that reached his eyes. She's healing. We all are. The ranch is looking good, Sarah observed. Joseph says the new calf count is the highest in years. Good grass this spring, Mason replied. He was speaking more each day, though still a man of few, carefully chosen words. He turned to face her, taking her hands in his. Sarah, I'm not sure what the future holds. Ranch needs work. I'm not an easy man. I'm not looking for easy, she answered. I'm looking for real. Mason nodded, understanding. When I lost Lily, thought I'd never find home again. He glanced toward the house where Emily slept. You gave that back to us. You gave me somewhere to belong, Sarah countered. Something I hadn't had in a very long time. Mason reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple silver band with a small turquoise stone. Lily's ring. He held it up, a question in his eyes. Are you sure? Sarah asked, understanding his meaning perfectly. Mason nodded. Lily would want Emily to have a mother, want me to live again. He paused, searching for the right words. Not replacing her, honoring her. I would be proud to wear it, Sarah said, tears welling in her eyes. Not to replace what you had, but to build something new together. Mason slipped the ring onto her finger, then cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. First time in years, he said, his voice strong and clear. I don't feel like a man half dead. As the last light faded from the sky, They stood together on the porch of the home they had defended and would now share. No formal ceremony, no witnesses but the stars above. Just two people who had found each other against all odds, choosing to face whatever came next, side by side. Inside, Emily slept peacefully, her nightmares finally giving way to dreams of tomorrow. On her small table lay her finished drawing, three figures standing in front of a ranch house, with the words "My Family" carefully printed beneath. A month later, Mason rode into Silver Creek for supplies, Sarah and Emily beside him on their own horses. The town had changed. A new sheriff, elected rather than appointed, and a growing respect for the quiet rancher who had stood against corruption. As they tied their horses outside the general store, a stranger approached, a hard-faced man with a U.S. Marshal's badge. "Mason Coulter?" he asked. Mason nodded, instinctively moving in front of Sarah and Emily. "Name's Hank Dawson, U.S. Marshal. Been tracking a gang that's hitting settlements from here to Copper Springs. Word is you were an Army scout and know this territory better than most." "That's right," Mason confirmed. "I could use a man with your skills," Dawson said. "Territorial governors authorized me to deputize local men who know the land." Mason looked at Sarah, a silent question in his eyes. She nodded slightly, understanding. "Be gone a week, maybe two," the marshal continued. "Pays $5 a day plus expenses." Mason extended his hand. "When do we leave?" "First light tomorrow," Dawson replied, shaking it firmly. "Meet me at the Silver Creek Hotel." As the marshal walked away, Sarah took Mason's arm. "You're going to help?" Mason nodded. "Good men need to stand up. Otherwise, men like Hollister win." He looked down at Emily, then back at Sarah. "Besides, got more to protect now." Sarah smiled, understanding the man she had come to love. A man of few words but unfailing action. "We'll be waiting for you to come home." If this tale of redemption and second chances stirred something in your soul, hit that subscribe button and join us next week when we follow Marshall Dawson and Mason Coulter as they track the notorious Maxwell Gang through the Arizona Badlands in the Silent Man's vengeance. Until then, remember, in the West, a man's word was his bond, but actions always spoke louder.